Why do you always feel drawn to the same types of people who destroy you? Why, even knowing that certain dynamics are toxic? Do you keep repeating the same relational mistakes? You meet someone new. There's that spark, that magnetic pull you can't explain. Your friends warn you. Your rational mind knows better. But something deeper, something you can't name, drives you forward anyway. And months later, you're picking up the pieces again, wondering how you ended up in the exact same pattern. The truth is that you are not in control of your romantic choices, professional decisions, or even how you react to the world. There is another within you, an archetypal force of the opposite sex, that is secretly directing your life like an invisible puppeteer. Carl Jung called this anima and animus, the hidden masculine and feminine forces that inhabit our unconscious. For Jung, this wasn't just theory. It was the diagnosis of why humanity lives in perpetual internal conflict. These aren't abstract concepts from dusty psychology books. They are living, breathing forces operating through you right now, influencing every significant decision you make. Today, you're going to discover how these forces are manipulating every aspect of your existence and, more importantly, how Jung discovered the key to freeing yourself from this psychological prison. But first, you need to understand something that will disturb you. The person you think you are is only half the story. From the moment you took your first breath, society began a systematic process of fragmenting your soul. You were taught, through 1,000 subtle and not so subtle messages, to repress aspects of your nature that didn't align with your biological gender. Boys don't cry. Girls don't get angry. Men provide. Women nurture. This isn't just social conditioning. It's psychological amputation. Jung discovered something terrifying. When we repress these qualities, they don't disappear. They get pushed into the unconscious, where they develop a life of their own. Like a severed limb that continues to send phantom pain, your repressed masculine or feminine nature continues to operate. But now from the shadows, beyond your conscious control. Think about it. How many men do you know who pride themselves on being logical and unemotional, yet make the most irrational decisions when it comes to women? How many women have you encountered who consider themselves independent and strong, yet find themselves inexplicably drawn to men who treat them poorly? This isn't weakness. This isn't failure of character. This is the anima and animus operating autonomously, like rogue programs running in the background of your psyche. For men, an unintegrated anima reveals itself in devastating ways. You feel inexplicably attracted to dramatic, inaccessible women who keep you in a constant state of emotional turmoil. You experience emotional explosions that surprise even you, followed by deep shame because real men don't act this way. You make impulsive decisions based on feelings you can't explain or justify. When the women in your life are unhappy, you feel fundamentally lost, as if your very identity depends on their approval. This isn't love. This is possession by an archetypal force you refuse to acknowledge. For women, an uncontrolled animus manifests as an attraction to domineering or emotionally unavailable men. You feel a compulsive need to prove your competence in masculine environments, often at the cost of your authentic self. There's an internal critic, harsh, implacable, disguised as logic, that tells you you're never quite good enough, smart enough, strong enough. You feel like you need to think like a man to be taken seriously, abandoning your intuitive wisdom in the process. This isn't empowerment. This is internal colonization by a force you won't integrate. Jung realized something that most people refuse to accept. This isn't a personal failing. This is the universal human condition. We all carry these contradictory forces, and the more we deny them, the more they control us through projections and compulsions. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Jung discovered that when we don't integrate our anima or animus, it becomes what he called an autonomous complex, literally a separate personality that acts through us without our conscious knowledge. It's like having a stranger driving your life while you sit in the passenger seat, convinced you're in control. The woman who swears she wants a nice guy but consistently chooses emotionally unavailable men isn't being hypocritical. Her animus is seeking integration through projection. Trying to connect with the assertive, focused masculine energy she's disowned in herself. The man who claims he wants an independent woman but becomes controlling and jealous in relationships isn't being manipulative. His anima is crying out for the emotional depth and intuitive connection he's spent his entire life suppressing. You see, Jung discovered something that will shake you to your core. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own projected anima or animus. That magnetic attraction you feel? That's your psyche recognizing its missing half in another person. That's why the most intense relationships often become the most destructive. You're not relating to a real human being. You're relating to a projection of your own unconscious. And when that person inevitably fails to live up to your projection, when they reveal themselves to be human, flawed, complex, you don't adjust your expectations. You get angry, disappointed, betrayed, because they've failed to be the perfect container for your disowned psychological content. This is why your relationships follow the same pattern. It's not because you have bad taste or trust issues. It's because you're unconsciously seeking the same archetypal energy over and over again, trying to heal a wound that can only be healed from within. Jung's discovery goes far deeper than just romantic relationships. These autonomous complexes are wreaking havoc across every area of your life, and most people don't even realize it's happening. Your mental health suffers in ways that seem inexplicable. You experience depression that doctors can't quite diagnose, a soul-deep emptiness that no amount of therapy or medication seems to touch. This isn't clinical depression. This is existential depression. Your psyche is mourning its lost wholeness. You live with chronic anxiety that feels like it's coming from nowhere. But Jung understood. This anxiety is the constant internal war between who you've been conditioned to be and who you actually are. Your nervous system is in perpetual fight or flight because part of you is always under attack. There's that nagging sense that something is missing, but I don't know what. Of course something is missing. You've amputated half of your psychological nature and spent your entire life pretending it doesn't exist. The missing piece isn't out there in some perfect partner or dream job. It's in you, banished to the basement of your unconscious. Your compulsions and addictions make perfect sense through Jung's lens. That compulsive scrolling, the inability to put down your phone, the need for constant validation, these aren't moral failings. They're desperate attempts to feed the starved aspects of your psyche. The sensitive man drowns his anima in pornography and digital fantasy. The assertive woman feeds her animus through workaholism and competitive achievement. But nowhere is the damage more obvious than in your relationships. You attract the same types of people over and over because you're advertising for a very specific archetypal energy. The independent woman who keeps dating controlling men is unconsciously seeking someone to carry her disowned masculine authority. The logical man who falls for dramatic, unstable women is projecting his repressed emotional depth onto them. These relationships start with intensity that feels like destiny. Of course they do. You're meeting your missing self in another person. But they always end in destruction because no human being can carry the weight of your projections forever. Eventually, they crack under the pressure of being your psychological savior. The jealousy, the possessiveness, the need to control. These aren't character flaws. These are symptoms of projection. You're terrified of losing this person because losing them feels like losing yourself. And in a very real sense, it is. You've made them responsible for carrying parts of your psyche that you refuse to own. But the damage doesn't stop at relationships. Your entire life potential is being sabotaged by these autonomous forces. You choose careers that seem appropriate for your gender, but leave you feeling empty and unfulfilled. The sensitive man becomes an accountant to prove his masculinity, while his creative soul withers. The intuitive woman becomes a corporate lawyer to demonstrate her strength while losing touch with her inner wisdom. Your creativity becomes blocked because the anima and animus are primary sources of inspiration. When you cut yourself off from these forces, you cut yourself off from the wellspring of your own genius. How many breakthrough innovations, artistic masterpieces, and moments of profound insight have been lost to this collective psychological mutilation? You make decisions that seem rational on the surface, but leave you feeling like you're living someone else's life. Because in a very real sense, you are. You're living the life that your persona thinks you should live, not the life that your whole self wants to create. The peace you crave, that sense of being centered, of feeling at home in your own skin, remains perpetually elusive. You live in a constant state of internal civil war. Part of you trying to be what you think you should be, another part rebelling against those constraints. You feel fundamentally off, like you're wearing clothes that don't fit, playing a role that was written for someone else. The self-criticism is relentless. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. That harsh internal voice isn't your conscience or your standards. It's your disowned animus or anima, turned critic because it's been denied integration. The woman who constantly berates herself for not being logical enough is being tormented by her rejected masculine side. The man who tears himself apart for being too emotional is at war with his banished feminine nature. You sabotage yourself just when success is within reach, because deep down, your psyche knows that external achievement can never heal internal fragmentation. Your unconscious would rather keep you struggling than let you succeed while living as half a person. Most people, when they start to glimpse this reality, make the same tragic mistake. They think the solution is to swing to the opposite extreme. Men try to become more sensitive and in touch with their feelings. Women try to become more assertive and rational. But this isn't integration. It's just another form of possession. The man who decides he needs to get in touch with his feminine side often becomes what Jung called the puer aeternus, the eternal boy. He abandons all boundaries, becomes overly accommodating, loses his backbone in relationships. He thinks he's being evolved, but he's actually being controlled by his anima as much as he was when he was suppressing it. The woman who decides she needs to embrace her masculine power often becomes harsh, controlling, disconnected from her intuitive wisdom. She thinks she's being empowered, but she's just traded one form of internal tyranny for another. Jung saw that both extremes lead to the same destination. More fragmentation, more internal conflict, more projection onto others. The sensitive man who becomes a nice guy doesn't integrate his masculinity. He just becomes possessed by a different aspect of his anima. The assertive woman who becomes aggressive doesn't integrate her femininity. She becomes possessed by a toxic aspect of her animus. This is why most therapeutic approaches fail to address the real problem. They focus on symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, the relationship patterns, without understanding the underlying archetypal dynamics. You can spend years in therapy learning to communicate better or set boundaries. But if you haven't integrated your anima or animus, you're still operating from a fragmented psyche. The self-help industry makes billions selling you the same false promise that you can fix your life by becoming more of what you already are. More confident, more assertive, more loving, more disciplined. But Jung understood something revolutionary. You don't need to become more of anything. You need to become whole. The tragic irony is that the very qualities you've spent your life suppressing are exactly what you need to solve your current problems. The overly rational man who struggles with relationships has emotional intelligence locked away in his rejected anima. The overly emotional woman who struggles with career advancement has strategic thinking imprisoned in her disowned animus. Your anima holds your capacity for intuition, creativity, emotional depth, and receptivity. Your animus holds your ability to focus, discriminate, set boundaries, and take decisive action. When these forces are split off and operating autonomously, they become destructive. When they're integrated and working in harmony, they become the source of your greatest power. Jung discovered that what we call genius, those rare individuals who seem to operate from a place of profound wisdom and creative power, are simply people who have learned to dance with both their masculine and feminine natures simultaneously. They haven't eliminated one in favor of the other. They've learned to let both forces inform their decisions, their creativity, their relationships. But here's the revelation that changes everything. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not lacking something that you need to find out there. You are a complete human being who has been taught to live as half a person. Jung discovered that true psychological maturity doesn't come from eliminating these forces, but from individuating them, recognizing the anima and animus as legitimate and valuable parts of yourself that need to be honored, not controlled. Think about it this way. Imagine you're a dancer trying to execute a complex dance, but you're pretending you don't have one of your arms. You can try to compensate. You can develop incredible strength in your other arm. You can become the best one-armed dancer in the world. But the dance will never be complete. It will never be graceful. It will never be what it could have been. The individuation process is learning to dance with all your limbs, including the ones society told you to hide. But here's where everything you've been told about yourself gets turned upside down. What you've been calling your weakness, that emotional sensitivity you try to suppress, that's not weakness. That's your anima trying to bring you intuition, depth, and the ability to connect authentically with others. What you've been labeling as your controlling tendencies, that drive to organize, to structure, to make things happen, that's not a character flaw. That's your animus bringing you focus, direction, and the power to manifest your vision in the world. Your supposedly problematic attractions aren't signs of bad judgment. They're unconscious maps showing you exactly which aspects of yourself need to be integrated. Every person you've ever been magnetically drawn to is carrying a piece of your own psychological puzzle. The unavailable woman who drives you crazy is showing you your own capacity for mystery and independence. The domineering man who both attracts and repels you is reflecting your own disowned authority and decisiveness. Your internal conflicts aren't defects to be fixed. They're invitations to wholeness. When you stop fighting these forces and start dialoguing with them, something magical happens. You become complete. The desperate need to find your other half begins to fade because you're developing a relationship with your own inner opposite. The harsh self-criticism transforms into inner wisdom. You stop projecting onto others and start seeing the real human beings in front of you. But let me be specific about what this integration actually looks like, because most people have no idea what they're aiming for. A man who has integrated his anima doesn't become weak or effeminate. He becomes powerfully intuitive. He walks into a room and can sense the emotional undercurrents that everyone else misses. He can read his partner's needs not because he's been trained to, but because he's developed his natural empathic abilities. His creativity explodes because he's tapped into the wellspring of inspiration that flows through the feminine principle. His relationships deepen because he can connect emotionally without losing his sense of self or his masculine edge. He makes better business decisions because he's consulting both his analytical mind and his gut instinct. He can be fierce when protection is needed and tender when love is called for. He doesn't swing between these states awkwardly. He flows between them naturally, like a jazz musician moving between notes. A woman who has integrated her animus doesn't become cold or controlling. She becomes powerfully focused. She can cut through confusion and emotional manipulation like a sword through fog. She sees what needs to be done, and she does it, without second-guessing herself or seeking validation from others. Her boundaries become clear and unshakable, but they're not defensive walls. They're conscious choices about where she directs her energy. She can compete and achieve without sacrificing her feminine wisdom or intuitive knowing. She makes strategic decisions that honor both her rational analysis and her deep, body-based knowledge of what's right. She can be soft and receptive when the moment calls for it, and strong and directive when leadership is needed. The most successful people, the most creative people, the most emotionally intelligent people, they're not operating from just their conscious personality. They're drawing on their integrated opposites. They're psychologically androgynous, not sexually, but in terms of having access to the full spectrum of human consciousness. Think about the leaders you most admire, the artists whose work moves you to tears, the people in your life who seem most centered, most authentic, most vibrantly alive. I guarantee you they've learned, consciously or unconsciously, to honor both their masculine and feminine natures. They haven't become balanced in some bland, neutered way. They've become dynamically whole. Steve Jobs wasn't just a rational technology executive. He was deeply intuitive, aesthetic, even mystical in his approach to innovation. Maya Angelou wasn't just a sensitive poet. She was fierce, disciplined, strategically brilliant in how she crafted her career and message. These individuals accessed their full psychological inheritance. This isn't about becoming balanced in some middle ground way that flattens your personality. This is about becoming dynamically whole, able to be laser-focused when the situation demands it, and deeply receptive when that's what's needed. Able to be protective and aggressive when your boundaries are threatened, and vulnerable and open when love is present. When you're operating from this integrated place, everything changes. Your relationships transform completely. You stop looking for someone to complete you and start looking for someone to share completeness with. You stop projecting your unlived life onto your partner and start seeing them as they actually are. Not as the carrier of your anima or animus, but as a separate, complex human being worthy of love for who they are, not for what they represent to your unconscious. The jealousy and possessiveness fade because you're no longer trying to own parts of yourself through another person. The need to control your partner's behavior diminishes because you're no longer depending on them. to carry your psychological projections. You can love without grasping, commit without losing yourself, be intimate without merging into codependence. Your career begins to reflect your whole self, not just the socially acceptable parts. You stop choosing professions based on what you think you should do, and start choosing work that allows both sides of your nature to contribute. The sensitive man might become a therapist who uses both analytical training and intuitive insight. The strategic woman might become an entrepreneur who builds companies that honor both profit and purpose. Your creativity explodes because you're no longer cutting yourself off from half your inspiration. The feminine principle is the source of artistic vision, of seeing possibilities that don't yet exist. The masculine principle is the force that brings those visions into concrete reality. When you have access to both, you become unstoppable as a creator. Your decision-making becomes intuitive and strategic simultaneously. You can feel your way into the right choice and then think your way through how to implement it. You stop second-guessing yourself because you're consulting your full intelligence, not just the parts of it that society told you were acceptable. Most importantly, you start living your actual life instead of the life you think you're supposed to live. You stop performing your gender and start embodying your humanity. You stop trying to be half a person very well and start being a whole person authentically. But how do you actually begin this integration? How do you start recognizing and dialoguing with these hidden forces that have been operating in the shadows of your psyche? Jung taught a principle that will revolutionize how you understand yourself. Start paying attention to your extreme emotional reactions, especially the ones that surprise or embarrass you. These aren't signs of weakness or loss of control. These are the voices of your anima or animus demanding recognition. When you find yourself inexplicably angry at your partner for something small, don't just apologize and move on. Ask yourself, what part of me is feeling unheard right now? When you feel that familiar anxiety before making a decision, don't just push through it. Pause and ask, what is my inner wisdom trying to tell me? The woman who finds herself irrationally irritated by her colleague's success isn't just being petty. Her animus is pointing out that she's not honoring her own ambitions. The man who feels surprisingly emotional during a movie isn't being too sensitive. His anima is showing him depths of feeling he's been afraid to acknowledge. Instead of judging these reactions, get curious about them. Jung discovered that the psyche is always trying to heal itself, always trying to achieve wholeness. Your extreme emotions are breadcrumbs leading you back to your abandoned self. Start having conversations with these different aspects of your personality. When you notice your controlling tendencies emerging, don't just suppress them. Ask, what does this part of me need right now? What is it trying to protect or achieve? When you feel your emotional side taking over, don't just rationalize it away. Ask, what wisdom is this feeling trying to convey? This isn't about becoming self-indulgent or using your emotions as an excuse for bad behavior. This is about becoming psychologically literate, learning to read the language of your own unconscious and understanding what it's trying to communicate. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict between these different aspects of yourself. The goal is to become conscious of the conflict so you can mediate it rather than being controlled by it. You become the conductor of your own psychological orchestra instead of being swept away by whichever instrument is playing loudest at the moment. Jung understood that this work never ends. Individuation is a lifelong process of becoming more and more conscious of all the different forces operating within your psyche. But even small steps toward integration create profound changes in how you experience life. Remember this: you are not half a person searching for completion from the outside. You are not broken. You are not lacking something essential that you need to find in a perfect partner, a dream job, or an ideal life circumstance. You are a complete human being, learning to honor all your dimensions. You carry within you both the capacity for deep, intuitive knowing and sharp, analytical thinking. You have both the ability to receive and the power to act. You contain both the wisdom to flow with life and the strength to shape it according to your will. The person you've been seeking in others, the missing piece you've been trying to find out there, that person is you. The integration of your anima and animus isn't just psychological healing. It's coming home to yourself. In the comments, tell me, which force, masculine or feminine, do you feel you have the most difficulty integrating in your life? And how does this show up in your relationships? Your journey toward wholeness begins with honest recognition of the forces already operating within you. Jung showed us that the path to freedom isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming completely who you already are.